Hello, my name is Emily Runninger, and welcome back to another installment of Hashtag Feature Friday, a segment dedicated to showcasing different student athletes, coaches, and personnel in the Rising Stars Football Academy family. Now, today we have Michael Diller. Michael is a licensed clinical psychologist and director of the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program at WellSpan Health. He has over 30 years in this field, with 19 of those years providing direct patient counseling. And we appreciate him sharing his expertise with us today. So thanks for joining us, Mike.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here. Thank you, Emily, for having me today. I appreciate the time to be able to share together.
So first, I really just want to dive into kind of your background. And first of all, how did you even become interested in psychology?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I know that with Rising Stars Football Academy, you are working with young kids and student athletes and teenagers. So that's kind of where it all started with me as well. So I had an interest in sports for sure, and I played sports growing up. But in high school, and that's kind of where it started, I experienced some friends who had really struggled with emotional kind of stressors in their life. There was one situation, and I'll share this here, was that one of my friends that I knew, not closely, but we grew up together, had died by suicide. And so that was something that really kind of set me spinning and really the whole school, because we had never experienced that. So it is certainly not something we would ever want to see or experience, but it certainly brought to me that we could find better ways to be there for each other, to lift each other up and find ways to do that. So that's where it all started. And that was back many years ago. And then I just pursued kind of a pathway to say, you know what, I want to be able to give back in that way. And so kind of my career path, my education pathway through my psychology training. So ended up being able to get a doctorate in clinical psychology through my training, and then entered into different opportunities within the field of psychology to be able to give back. So, and you had mentioned before in the introduction, spent about 19 years with working in direct care. When I mean by direct care, sitting with people and talking about their stories, being able to share a little bit to try to help them find a better way in writing a story, continuing to write the story that they wish to be able to have some influence and control over, and making it better than where it was yesterday. That's kind of an overview of just kind of where it got started, and kind of where I'm still as passionate about being able to try to give back in those ways.
And can you kind of walk through that process of obtaining your degrees and the steps that you needed to take and the degrees that you needed to get to do exactly what you're doing now?
So I went to the University of Pittsburgh and wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. Within my first year, I kind of figured things out, and I wanted to major in psychology. So I remember having a meeting with my advisor saying, this is what I want to do. And she said, do you know how long that's going to take? And I said, not really, but I really want to do that. And can you help me set a pathway to be able to do that? And I said, that's what I really want to do. And so I ended up getting different experiences, some volunteer experiences, what they would call kind of volunteer practicum experiences when I was at Pitt. And I met some really inspiring professors who took an interest in me and supported me, believed in me. So I took it to another level. I went off to graduate school, had a chance to go either to a master's program or a doctoral program. I chose a master's program first. I was at Loyola College back then in Baltimore. It is now Loyola University. So I go there, finish up my degree. That's 2 more years. So 4 years undergraduate, 2 years of master's. And so my advisor was right. It takes a little while to get there. But I was determined and I was driven to say, you know what, this is what I want to do. So I want to keep going. So I did. And so I ended up applying and got into a doctoral program that really matched my values and what I wanted to do in the end. And that was at the University of Hartford in Hartford, Connecticut, in West Hartford, Connecticut. And I had a tremendous experience there. Went on to what I call a pre-doctoral internship, and that was at the Devereaux Foundation outside of Philadelphia. It's a national organization, residential treatment centers for children and adolescents. So my focus over all these years, primarily, even though I would work with the full age spectrum, so as young as, maybe 4 or 5, all the way up to one of the last people that I saw, he was in his mid 80s. So I had the full range, but most of my focus and energy centered around kids and teenagers and young adults. That's who I worked with most. So I had a place in my heart and a passion for that. And I still do even today, even though I'm now in a different space and have moved on. And we can talk a little bit about that as well. But, that was another 5 years. I earned my doctorate in clinical psychology. And I came back and I got my first opportunity in York, Pennsylvania. Someone I met through a connection, actually through Millersville University, another local university. They provided a way to have an introduction. And so it was a bridge conversation. The owner of that organization said, come on in. They offered me my first job. And I never looked back. So that's where I started. And then WellSpan Health came into play in 2001. Our small practice I was a part of, where I got my start, we merged with WellSpan Health. And again, I've never looked back since then. So 21 years now. It took me a while to get there, but I was driven to get there. And here I am, still as passionate as I was back then.
And like you said, you've been with WellSpan for over 20 years, which I mean is an achievement in itself. But I am really interested in how your career has evolved within WellSpan. Not many people nowadays stay with the same company for that amount of years, but I'm sure what you're doing now is a little bit different from what you started out doing with them.
For many years, I was doing what we would refer to, as I mentioned, I think earlier, about direct care work, and that's working with clients and patients. And a lot of my work was centered around working with kids and children and adolescents, teens, young adults, and that was on the counseling side of things. So I would work with families as well. Relationships matter, no matter where you are, no matter how young you are, supportive relationships around you. You heard me say earlier about, I had a few people, some professors that took an interest in me. They believed in me. They encouraged me. Those are huge. So even at WellSpan, I've had those relationships over the years, surrounded myself with people and had the privilege and honor of meeting people that have been that as well. I've had now opportunities to kind of grow and move in different directions. And one of those happened in 2016. One of those opportunities, after all those years in behavioral health, I got a phone call, and it was from a friend and a colleague. And they said, would you ever consider becoming the director of the WellSpan Employee Assistance Program? And I said, I don't think so. I said, we're in the middle of a lot going on here, and some things happening and some big things, and kind of just taking this a whole new level with behavioral health. So I'm pretty good. We had a brief conversation. I've known this person. He was the former director for my entire career, actually. I had shared this with my wife. My wife said, well, maybe it's something that you can take your personal why, your passion, to offer hope and support and take it to a different level, a different, bigger, wider audience. And I said, never thought about it that way. Had further conversations. And now 6 years later, I sit here with you, Emily. I did take that opportunity, and I've been very grateful for the relationships I've had through the years. So the relationships have been huge throughout my life when I look back, those that have been positive and supportive and encouraging. And then opportunities to work as hard as I could in the ways that I could offer, and then have people there, around me to help support, and then opportunities have unfolded. I took one of those up in 2016, and I'm, still doing it now. Doing a lot of work now with well-being and working on resilience and how we overcome challenges and adversity and adapt to uncertainty and those kinds of things. And all of that work applies in the sports arena as well, on the field, off the field, life, both ways, because we live whole lives, complete stories. And so even though I'm more specific in working with our employer community right now, our focus as an EAP is how can we support good mental health, well-being within an organization, including ours at WellSpan Health. So that's been a large focus of my work here, particularly through the pandemic.
I was just going to touch on that too. Like you mentioned the uncertainty of the last couple of years, and I'm really interested in hearing from your perspective, and somebody who talks to people every single day who's probably struggling a little bit with their mental health regarding, everything kind of going on. What have been a few pillars that you've really tried to stick to or kind of pass on to the people that you work with to help get through this uncertainty in this time of just, I don't know what's going to happen next. People are really, really sick. People are hurting in other ways that we haven't seen in such a long time. Like, how have you been able to essentially stay so positive and kind of push through this just crazy time that unfortunately we're in right now?
I remember sitting in a presentation. I've done a lot of kind of community presentations and different types of presentations, even within our health system, about these types of topics and issues in terms of well-being, and how do we find ways to stay as resilient as we can or support team and not only our own resilience, but just our fellow colleagues and coworkers as well. You mentioned stay positive, and I work to try to do that all the time. But the other reality is, as you mentioned too, this pandemic has tested all of us. I had been in a presentation one time and they said 90% of Americans have their mental health has been tested and impacted. And I remember looking, I'm thinking 90, that's a lot of people. But I'm thinking, if you only look in the mirror, I bet that number is probably 100%. All of us. And the thread that binds us all together is that we're human. So people will look at me and say, you're the psychologist, and how do you stay focused and together and positive? And so I aspire to do that. And I aspire to share that positivity and that light with other people, because I know how much that means to others. The research will support that. The evidence will support that. But I also know what that means to me when someone else does that to me. So that kind of theme right there, when you look at the research on resilience, one of the things that rises to the top. So resilience, common definition, is just the ability to bounce back from adversity and challenge, to adapt to adversity and challenge and uncertainty. That's just the common level set definition. To be able to connect with others, to be there for others, to support others, to care about others. That is what absolutely is instrumental in being able to help people grow that resilience, that strength to be able to come through and navigate those uncertain times. So the power of human connection and being able to do that in a meaningful, caring way is something that rises to the top of being able to grow that resilience. And so the other piece of that, we could go many different directions in terms of what other things would I recommend and hold on to. But the other piece I would say is that because we're vulnerable, doesn't matter who we are and doesn't matter what we do, how many skills we have, how many resources I have, and no matter how smart I may be, there are going to be times and moments that we're going to struggle with adversity. We mentioned the pandemic. We have no reference for this. There's nothing where we can say, well, the last pandemic that I was in, this is how I handled that. We can't do that. So we're kind of growing a reference, building that right now. And how do we get through this? And some cardinal reminders through the resilience research will tell us making sure we stay together as best as possible. And I know that that has been difficult given all the other storms that have unfolded underneath the pandemic. But here's the other thing. Each one of us, you, Emily, me, everyone else that's looking right now, we all have the ability and we have what they would call agency, the influence and power to control what happens next, choices that we make, how I respond to what's happening to my life. Sometimes things happen in our life that unfold in ways we didn't foresee, we didn't have control over, but we do have a choice in how we respond to those circumstances. And that's huge. So a couple things, recognizing that adversity is going to happen in our lives. It's just going to happen. And if we didn't believe that, and if we didn't want to acknowledge that, well, we got constant reminders of that through the last 2.5 years. But it was true even before the pandemic. It will affect all of us. And then how do we best navigate that? You already heard me say about the power of human connection, being there for others, to lean on and then to be able to lift other people up as well. Because in life, we're going to be in both roles. We have the opportunity. I call it an invitation. We have an invitation to be there for someone that they need you. And there's going to be other times that I'm going to need someone. And so I need to lean on them. And that's true if you're in sports or if you're just living life outside of whatever field or surface you may be a part of in the athletic arena. It carries over in life both ways. So that piece is huge. And then the other piece is making sure that you take care of yourself, that you acknowledge that you have to start with yourself. Sometimes people are like, oh gosh, this is common sense, right? We have to take care of ourselves. But often as human beings, we just keep going. We're going after something. We keep going and going and going. We find ourselves in a whirlwind and we don't press pause. We don't slow down. And it creates a lot of angst, a lot of stress. It can really affect our ability to be at our best. So in order to be at our best, we have to start with the bare basics. Take care of those bare basics. Self-care, including your mental health, your emotional well-being, your physical health, starting there. That's the foundation. Press pause, show some self-grace or self-compassion, starting with yourself. A lot of times we get caught up in life in the whirlwind, and we have to have reminders to just return to myself, return to the self, to be able to just say, let me start there. Let me start taking care of some of these bare basics. And that'll get me to a place that I can address maybe some of the other things, remembering that I do have control over a choice on how I'm going to respond to the circumstances I may find myself in.
And I think that ties really well with something that you mentioned previously about kind of finding your why. And I'm curious because I don't know if everybody who's watching this right now really understands what you mean when you say find your why or remember what your why is. So can you kind of touch on that, how you specifically found your why, and then how it's kind of help you navigate your career path, your relationships?
Several years back, I came across Simon Sinek. So Simon Sinek is an expert in the kind of the organizational or kind of leadership development. And he talks about things like trust and cooperation and what makes a strong team or a high performing team, things like that. He also wrote a book called Start With Why. And I had, been interested in some of his other work, but I read that book and it talks about starting off with your sense of purpose. What matters to me? What values do I have that's going to be at my core? And then it will help guide me on kind of the things I end up venturing into, what I want to pursue. But it starts with what really matters to me and what my why is. And so my purpose. So if I said, so what's your why? People may say, I'm not sure. I'm still trying to figure this out. And they would be right. Still trying to figure it out. Now, that can be something that evolves and changes over time. Given someone who may be in their teens or young adult, you're still trying to work some of that out. Some do have kind of that, I have it. This is what I want to do. Like when I went to my advisor, I said, I want to go in this track. So why would I do that? Why is that my why? You hear the terms lifelong learning, and I'm a big believer in that. If you're open to learning across the way, so many amazing things can happen, including kind of figuring out what your why is. For me, it's been, how can I help inspire and encourage and support people to live a more hopeful, a more helpful, a more fulfilling life. That's kind of really at the core. So offering that kind of hope and support and being able to encourage people, be there. How do we do that? That's what really gets me going. When people say, why do you get up every day to do what you're doing? And I've been blessed to be surrounded by team members that do that as well, because they're in there every day doing this type of work and that kind of support where they're there, creating kind of a culture of well-being that allows for people to be able to lean on others and then also lift other people up. There's a saying that I use a lot of times in my title presentations, and it was, when we lift others, we all rise. And you can flip that around. We all rise when we lift others. And I love that. And through the pandemic, it threads everything that makes a difference right now in terms of being able to get through uncertainty and difficult times. If we can look out for that person to our left and right and right in front of us and behind us, we're going to create an environment that everyone wants to be a part of. At least I think most people that I know want to be a part of that kind of caring and kind of a culture that fosters and supports well-being. That's kind of a little bit more about my why. I'm glad you asked that. Simon really was the one who got me started to think about that. But purpose is huge. Why am I here? Trying to figure that out and, trying to find a passion in that purpose and that why. For those that are watching and say, well, gosh, I don't have that yet. That's okay. There's no pressure and no deadline to say you need to have it by this time. It's an evolving process. It's a learning process. It will be things like what really inspires you, what creates a passion in you. The more you can take that over time in maybe a particular interest, that can help you there, whether that's on the field somewhere, on the ice somewhere, in sports, but it also is in life when you leave that.
And I think you probably answered my next question here, but I was just really curious as to why you agreed to do this interview with me. I know it's probably not the people that you work with directly. These are young athletes, and I know you have a background of working with younger folks here, but why sit down and talk to me today?
So interestingly enough, so I grew up playing athletics. I was in baseball and football growing up. And what I really gravitated toward was my love of hockey. And so I grew up in a small town, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. That's where I was. We didn't have any ice when I was growing up in my day. No sheets of ice, no ice rinks. So I played street hockey. And people, oh, you mean like roller hockey? I'm like, nope. I mean, like Chuck Taylor's run on hot surface as fast as you can and learn the game of hockey. And I did that all 4 seasons. We played around the clock. So I found this love of hockey. And then as I got older, we had an ice rink and then another one. And so I was like, oh, so I started playing. I've been playing actually adult hockey rec leagues since the 90s. I still love it. There's that kind of culture of just doesn't matter what walk of life you're in. You can all come together around this love of sport and you form kind of your own tribe and your own kind of bonds there. It doesn't matter what you do when you leave that ice. Here's another piece, and I appreciate you asking this. So part of my clinical work, when I was doing that for years, I did see and work with some athletes that were focusing on getting to a national level, collegiately, even having dreams maybe of going to the Olympics. So I had worked with a couple of these athletes, and I got to tell you, it was probably some of my greatest learning. But with these athletes, we would talk about things like performance and how do I get to these goals. And I loved being able to work with them to try to help them get there. And then also we would talk about other things in life that may also influence one's ability to be able to get to your best, to be at your best, whatever that may be. So I have an interest there. Again, like I said, working with teenagers, young adults, that's what I did for many years. So when Matt from our sports medicine colleagues reached out to me, I said, I would welcome that. And like I said to you before we even got on here today, I just would love to be helpful. If some people can take away a couple things today, this group here, then that's what I would want for you.
Well, listen, I only got one question for you. We always end on this high note, a positive note, something to take away. So what is one piece of advice that you would like to share with any high school or maybe junior high football player?
I have a friend. Back to my Loyola days. He's actually a professor at Loyola now. And we didn't know each other then. When I left and went to the doctoral program, he came in and started his career there. He's just a great person, but a great expert in the field of trauma and crises. And he did a presentation for WellSpan Health about hope and healing. He was going down some tips. What can we do? What can we do? And he used this term, destination addiction, avoid it. And then when he explained it, I was like, I love that, because it's the same kind of theme that you can say it in different ways. There's meaning to this. And the meaning to that is sometimes we set goals. Goals are good. If I'm going to achieve something, I need to figure out what I'm trying to achieve. And then I need to have a map and how I'm going to get there. So in athletics, it's set the goals. Let's go get them. Let's come up with strategy to be able to do that. Prepare physically, prepare mentally, how I'm going to achieve that. But sometimes we get so focused on the end goal that we lose sight of the journey. And he said, don't ever lose sight of the journey. Make sure you're present in the moment to moments of that journey. You'll be a better person and be at a better place to actually achieve that of which you want to seek at the end. So that end goal is important to have, but don't ever lose sight of being right here, right now, in the moment. I never forgot that. So I think that's great advice. And when I was thinking about coming here today, I thought about that and being able to share that. And then one other related kind of concept, title of a book, Scott O'Neill is the former owner of the Philadelphia 76ers and I believe the New Jersey Nets. He wrote a book called Be Where Your Feet Are. Do you know it?
I have. I literally just read it for my work. We have a book club. So that was one of the books, the first books that we read this year. It's very good. I highly recommend.
So I am not saying that I'm going to sit here and promote because I have not read the book. So I was talking to a friend and she said, I read the book and she gave me the title. And I was like, I love that title.
Mhm.
But just the title alone, Be Where Your Feet Are, speaks to the same thing. Don't lose sight of being present in the moment. And sometimes you have to press pause, slow down, take care of yourself, be there for others, all those other things we talked about today, Emily, and then go chase that goal, that passion that drives it, stay persistent, persevere, but you got to do some things in the process to make sure you get there in the best way possible. Start with taking care of yourself, be in the moment, be where your feet are. I'm glad that's interesting. I didn't know you read the book.
Yeah.
You could speak to it. So I will not, because I did not read it, but that title caught my attention.
Yeah.
Be where your feet are, be present, be in the moment.
Well, hey, Mike, I really appreciate you kind of sitting down here and taking some time with me. It's truly been one of my favorite discussions that I've had with Rising Stars. So just a huge thank you again.
Emily, I so appreciate you again, what you're doing, the messages you're trying to share. Thank you for all of that and the opportunity. And I hope, to the audience, there's something here that you can kind of pause and reflect on and then use in your life. Thanks, Emily.